My name is Sumayyah Franklin, and my nickname is Sumi. I don't have a preference for either, and I'm from Oakland, California, and I'm a full spectrum traditional birth worker. I was very young when I first realized I wanted to be a birth worker, so it's almost hard for me to really say the exact time, but I know it was around maybe age 11 or 12. And I had a community auntie, like a play aunt, who was a midwife. And I, at some point, realized what that really meant, right? And I remember hearing her describe what she did and just feeling like, oh my God, that's what I want to do when I grow up. And ever since then, that moment forward, I had a word for exactly what I wanted to be, and was to be a midwife. After having that language to put to my vision of how I felt like who I wanted to be as an adult, I started to just make that the angle for everything I did moving forward. So although I was really heavily involved in the arts growing up, in dance, I was a musician, a poet, I would write poems about deconstructing the way that society looked at the pregnant body, like it's not disabled. For instance, at 13 years old, mind you, right? Anytime we got to pick a book report or an essay throughout my schooling, all the way through college, it was always geared towards or centered around reproductive health, reproductive justice, women's health, and family building and planning. And then naturally, after going for undergrad at SF State in Africana Studies, I knew after that the next step was to focus on midwifery. So for me, my path looks very different than a lot of other people. I think that the process of being pregnant and watching our bodies transform and becoming the observer of this process that we call pregnancy is art in itself. That the way the body just grows and expands, and all the new things that you learn about the human body, from what it can, the extent of what it can achieve and what it can do, to very physical things, like the way that things can look different, like my hips look different, my breasts look different. I think that's art. I feel like it's like we become a canvas, but it's like a live, in motion art piece. And then definitely the process of allowing spirit to transfer through our vessel is art in itself. And watching someone unfold in labor is like watching a flower bloom. Literally, the process of becoming raw and vulnerable and just in that receptive state to allow spirit to go through our bodies is art in itself. There is a lot of folks who are using the term POC, people of color, and I think it's really important for us to differentiate that the Black experience and the Indigenous experience is very different than some other groups of people who would be considered people of color. So the term BIPOC, Black Indigenous people of color, honors that we're not a monolith, we're not all the same, and I think it also holds space for how anti-Blackness and anti-indigeneity shows up within even POC spaces. The reason why I offer my services for Black Indigenous people of color primarily and really almost exclusively is because we are the ones who are the most impacted, and we need these services the most. That it's literally my protest. It's literally the way that I show up for the world that I want to see. The change that I want to see is how I show up for it. And it will break my heart to know that I had a seat filled up in my practice, because we only have a limit. I'm only one person, right? I had a seat filled up in my practice by someone who was of more privilege. And someone came to me who was a marginalized person, and I can't take them because I'm at capacity now. And I never want to experience that. So I make sure that I exclusively, have my services and my trainings, workshops for BIPOC. And I really center Black people within that. One of the most common questions I would say we as a collective community receive is the inquiry regarding, is home birth safe? And it really blows my mind that we question that. Like I said, most people's grandparents were born at home. I'm like, are they alive? Are they here? They're your grandma, so obviously they made it through birth, right? But even looking at the numbers, there is not one study that was, done with integrity, that shows that the hospital is a safer place to give birth than the home setting. In fact, there is multiple studies that allude to home being the safest place for people who are healthy and low risk, that having a skilled attendant there with you is safer than giving birth in the hospital, and especially for Black and Indigenous people. Especially, we have some of the worst we have the worst outcomes, not some of. We have the worst outcomes. Being pregnant, giving birth, postpartum, our children are the sickest within that setting. However, when you see Black folks receiving care from Black, especially out of hospital midwives, we see a drastic shift in their health outcomes. The same people with the same bodies, living in the same house with the same families, all of a sudden they're extremely more healthy and more likely to survive. Really at the center of the midwifery model of care, it has nothing to do with what the person chooses. That in fact is all about the person's ability to choose. So if you want to have an elective C-section, my only intention is that you are fully aware of the benefits and the risks. That's it. I'm just wanting to make sure that you feel like you are fully situated in your autonomy and your ability to choose from an informed space. So absolutely, if you wanted to have a medicated birth, if you wanted to birth in the hospital, if you wanted to have or you need to have a cesarean, you can greatly benefit from the support of a doula. And as far as a midwife, what that can look like for a traditional midwife at least is something called Montrese services, so where you can have prenatals, and once you go into labor, the midwife can be with you, and when you're ready, you can go into the hospital and you can receive all the things that you want to receive. And then when you return back home from birthing there, you can receive in-home postpartum support in addition or to replace what you are getting in the institution. Yeah, I think that there is a misconception that because I primarily support folks in the home setting, that's all I do. Now, maybe I'm against, going to the hospital or against people choosing that as a route. I'm not against anything besides healthy outcomes, and that means holistically healthy. So mentally healthy, spiritually healthy, emotionally healthy. And a big part of that is our full spectrum of life experiences. So if a person is in my care and they experience a miscarriage or loss, then I'm right there with them the whole time, holding their hand through it, supporting them. And we have so many things that we do, from traditional holistic modalities to linking you with the right primary care provider for, to hold that space. Also, when people are contemplating or have chosen to have an abortion, I do consultations for that as well. So to help you ground yourself in your decision, I do not tell you what to do, but I can be a reflective ear and to hold space for it. Or, and if you choose to have an abortion, I can support you through the whole process, especially for the at-home option with the pill method. And also after, people don't think about after these experiences, we need support and care. So after experiencing an abortion, miscarriage, loss of any sort, we extensively show up for the postpartum part, and there's really a space in my heart for that, because I know it's so forgotten in society. So many of us go through these things in silence. Yeah, when I mention full spectrum, I'm meaning to be fully inclusive of what it can mean to be pregnant. So we don't always, make it to term. Sometimes we terminate the pregnancy. So within my training, I'm teaching people how to hold space for all those experiences. So abortion support, prenatal support, birth support, postpartum support, bereavement and loss support as well. I think there's so many different ways you can get into this work, so many different avenues and pathways to make it to similar arrival points. And going to a doula training is an excellent first step, although you do not need to go to a doula training in order to practice as a doula. And I didn't go to a doula training personally, for instance. However, I just started supporting my loved ones. So I always tell people all the time, whether you go to a training or not, just let everybody that knows you know what you're into. They should all know that this is your jam, that I want to show up for you in this way, and that when there's a need there in their life, they will naturally and organically call out to you if it resonates with them. There's no governing board for doulas. It's something that is person to person. It's a non-medical sector of birth work, and therefore you do not need to be licensed or certified to show up as a doula, although some families want that. And if you want to be a part of certain institutionalized programs, they may also request that. I think that I often confuse people because I play both roles as a midwife and a doula, and those two roles are oftentimes conflated. The biggest difference between a doula and a midwife, because they are very similar, is that the midwife is a primary care provider, that they provide clinical and medical support and insight and guidance, whereas the doula is like the best friend, but it's in professional relationships sometimes. And also your best friend can be your doula. That a lot of times it is just your auntie, your mom, your best friend who showed up for you in that doula way, providing emotional support, non-medical physical support, so just massaging you or holding your hand through, your experience literally and figuratively. And that is the biggest distinguishment. So of course the midwife can do a bit of that as well, but the doula is not going to be doing any vaginal exams, they're not drawing blood, they're not listening to the baby's heart, and they're not making any type of medical inclined decisions with you, whereas the midwife would be doing that. If I were to tell you anything, if you're aspiring to be a birth worker, is to trust the unfolding, to put yourself out there, to network, and to get involved in the birth worker community.